Stop.
All right, well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining today to learn more about how adopting AI can help overcome many, if not most, of your supply chain challenges. And that's a tall order to be sure, but we have the experts and expert advice on hand, and we believe will open your eyes and provide you with some actionable insights. I'm Al Wild, and I lead the customer success here at Innovate, and I'll be your host for our session today. But now on to the experts, and let me introduce our two panelists, starting with Dr. Gerardo Pelayo, Vice President of Supply Chain Solutions at Innovate Digital. Gerardo was a published author who earned his PhD in Logistics and Supply Chain Management from the MIT Zaragoza Logistics Program. And he spent the last 10 years bridging business problems with technical possibilities and solutions. And secondly, I'd like to introduce Rakesh Prasad, Senior Vice President and Head of our digital business here at Innovate. Rakesh is passionate about solving business problems by leveraging digital and analytic solutions and partnering with clients to thrive in an open digital economy. Now, our format today will be presenting questions and thought leadership in a fireside chat format rather than guiding you through a pre-configured and PowerPoint. So as importantly, we'll look to you to pose questions based on your personal interest so that we can be on target with what is meaningful to you. So we would ask, just post your questions in the Q&A and our team will organize them to present to our panelists. So let me kick things off with a question for you, Gerardo. So there are many terms flying around these days, one of them being customer-centric supply chain. And of course, customers are why we're all in business and why we want to keep them happy and supplied. Should that be our ultimate goal?
Well, yes, but to an extent. And there has to be somebody that buys our products, that buys our services in every supply chain. But there's two key questions that we have to think about before we try and give everything away. First thing, who do we want our customers to be? Are we being purposeful about who do we target? Do we understand why they are customers? Do we know if they're profitable, if it makes sense for us to service them? And data plays a huge role in defining that, in driving that understanding at scale, so that we can select who and what service do we provide for each of these customer segments. The other part to that question is, what are the constraints in that scenario? And there again, we can start to get into segmentation strategies of, well, we're going to provide this much service subject to, there's a premium fee, there's a minimum volume that allows for me to efficiently provide the service to these customers. So we have to look at it certainly from a customer-centric perspective, but do it in an intelligent way, taking advantage of the data that we have nowadays.
And
right, so
that's a good point, Gerardo, right? And from my perspective, right, I think the key part also is for the organizations to focus on how and where they want to serve their customer, right? And that's where the customer-centric supply chain becomes even more critical for them to start thinking. And what I mean by that is, sometimes if you look at, and I think all of us have had this experience, right? You look for a product, go to Target, look for a product, you will see this product is out of stock. You go to your local Target, you will find that product in stock and you can buy that product, and vice versa. You'll see that product is not there. But now the challenge that everybody's trying to see is from a customer standpoint, the message that the product is out of stock in Target is not the right message, right? How do we go about then building a supply chain that can support all channels where the customers would like to engage with you, and how do we build the right foundation for it, right? And that becomes the key, as Gerardo was mentioning, for us to think from a customer perspective, and how do you want to serve the customer and where you want to serve them.
So is there a case to be made to prioritize supply, kind of what Gerardo was saying, to the product lines and the customers that have the greatest financial impact? So that is what we all want to meet our SLAs. Does the 80-20 rule apply here? Meaning, let's focus on the first 80% of our customers that provide the greatest revenue, not the best for the other 20% of our customers, but is that a way to focus to work our way around the supply chain challenges?
Yeah, the philosophy is that one, I think we can be much more mature than that 80-20 rule, which it's existed for quite a while, right? You can see ABC products and the like. But now we do not need to look at things from a single dimension, for example, the revenue or the margin or you name it, but we can actually understand the interaction, understand the trade-offs of what's the margin that I'm going to get, what's the footprint that I'm able to achieve in the market, what's the reputation effects that I'm going to get, how do I minimize the risk of my customers churning because I'm providing this or that service. Before, it was really hard to look at all these dimensions at the same time and make quick decisions that could be translated into the day-to-day. If we start to talk about how technology has played a role in the way that we leverage this data, that's a very good use case. And we still want to prioritize, but we can now do so from a more holistic perspective and therefore make better decisions.
Understood. Let's talk a minute about things that we can't predict, black swan events. For example, and ignoring the pandemic elephant in the room for a minute, and who could know that a ship would get crosswise in the Suez Canal and be stuck there for a week, blocking all shipments there. But looking at another example of backup in shipping containers arriving at West Coast ports, weren't there warning signals that could have predicted the various points of failure if companies had been tracking the right data?
So I'll jump in first. And the definition of the right data is always a tricky one after the fact. Now, it is about the data that we're collecting and very often about how we're integrating the different data elements that we have. Because again, the alerts or the implications do not come from a single data source with all the information. And when thinking about these black swan events and how do we prepare against them, I think there's two main components. First, being able to identify and measure those risks, those low probability, high impact events. If I don't have visibility on them because I didn't have the data or because they're buried in one of 120 reports, I might as well not have it. First thing, visibility. Second thing is, since I understand what the trade-offs are, since I understand what the probabilities and the impact of these events materializing would be, then comes the optimization aspect of it, or some would call it prescriptive analytics. What do I do? What's the best strategy that I want to select in order to prepare for these events? And in some cases, that is how to minimize the impact, how to minimize the chance that the event happens in the first place. For example, my factory burning down. In some others, it's how do I build a resilient supply chain that has redundancies built in it so I can quickly get back on my feet after I get hit by one of these black swan events. And so there's not a single strategy that works in every scenario, and it depends on the objectives that each business has. But unless we're making those decisions against measurable risks, and unless we can optimize those decisions at scale, then we're really guessing with a large budget.
Yeah, and just to add, right, if you look at, I think two part, right? Predicting black swan events, by the nature, the name itself, they're called black swan events, right? So most of the time, it will be very hard for data to be able to identify there is going to be a black swan event. But what a more data-driven supply chain helps you is how quickly can you identify its impact, and then recovery process, how quickly you can come out of it and be ready to respond back, is what kind of you see in the difference, right? So if you look at what happened with us when we started with COVID in 2020 versus how the organizations got impacted, you could very quickly see organizations like Amazon and Walmart, who are far more mature in their supply chain and how they capture what kind of data they capture and how they build that whole insights into their ecosystem, their recovery in terms of us as a consumer getting products were much faster than what other stores had to face. It is just so that just shows that yes, while it will always be a challenge for data to directly be able to be predicting a black swan event, but having the right set and the right foundation built allows you to recover much faster and be able to then scale quickly to the needs of the customer, which has got changed based on the event that has just happened.
And
So if I, sorry,
sorry,
go ahead,
sorry,
Rod.
Al, but you made me think of another point, Rakesh, which is the actions that we take. It's very much like getting insurance, health insurance, car insurance. So when you pay for that and you never have an accident, then some people would say, oh, you wasted your money on that. It didn't make sense for you to get that insurance. And the same happens in business when you build this capability for being resilient and the black swan event doesn't materialize, or the specific one that you had prepared for doesn't materialize. It may look like a bad decision unless you have the data foundation that justifies why we're making these decisions, that it's a conscious strategy based on what may or may not happen. So we have to tie it all together so that there's a traceability and that we're better off majority of the time.
So I guess from a predictability perspective, one of the questions, and stepping aside from black swan events, but other events that have maybe impacted my supply chain, if my CEO comes down and said, all right, we know why this happened or how this happened, we know why it happened, what are you doing to make sure that it doesn't happen again? Kind of using the term that you used, Gerardo, prescriptive. So what data do I now not have that I might need in the future to optimize or protect my supply chain? Is it all internal data, or do I need to source other data systems from, let's call it the world at large?
Yeah, so there's a couple of schools of thought on that. And a lot of I really like that question because a lot of the momentum is, how do I bring in more data to improve my decisions or to do something with it? And because I have all this machinery behind to explore the data. And I think that the initial question should be, what is it that I want to achieve? Given that, what is the data that I have today and how am I leveraging it to help me with my goal? Because as we build this data foundation, and yes, we now have the option to get more external data, which certainly tends to make a difference. We've seen a bunch of applications, from weather patterns to traffic to behavioral data to how the market, stock market behaves. But where do I start so that I can demonstrate some quick wins early on that allows me time to start building that data foundation to drive the change management that the business requires? So not just about more data, it is also about knowing what kind of data do I not have relative to the goal that I'm looking for. And very often, from my experience, it tends to be that the data is, a lot of the critical data is already there, but it's disjoint, it's disconnected. And so we are only looking at one part of the picture, or we cannot obtain the data quickly enough to actually do something with it.
Yeah.
So,
And I think from my perspective, right, Al, the question that you ask is very interesting, right? I think definitely there is a merit and value in targeting new data sources. And given the way the technology has evolved, it is much easier now or much cheaper now to ingest as much data as you want, right? Because the technology has evolved, everybody has access to cloud-based solutions. But the key to what Gerardo said was knowing what question you're planning to answer and then having an ecosystem that allows you to access that data much more quicker. And that is where the key mindset have to change, right? Because all of us have heard this this term of data swamp, right? From data lake, we started hearing data swamp because the problem was people started ingesting all the data they could get hand to in this data lake, because data lake was cheaper. Amazon, Azure, Google just made it cheap for you to bring in all the data. But then the point is, how do I use what data I have? And just having the data does not make sure you're able to answer a question. You need to build a whole ecosystem that allows you to respond to a question a user is asking. So technology investment around building that framework that allows you to respond quickly to a question that a user is asking. That means how I can quickly process the data, how I can identify what I have in my system versus what I need to get out, also is very critical. It's not just about, hey, I went ahead and pumped all the data that I could get handled to, right? And last point that I will definitely highlight is external data is very critical, right? And organizations that have scaled their future looking analytical models, who are truly going into prescriptive dimension, right? All the cutting edge companies that we all talk about, they have a huge investment into external data, right? For example, the futures and future pricing of commodities. That is one big data set that a lot of people have started looking at it, right? The stock market data across different geographies of your suppliers and how that geography is doing from a GDP standpoint. Those are additional data sets that from a supplier risk standpoint becomes very critical, right? So there are a lot of new data sets that you can start pulling in now, given the technology allows you to do that much easier. But then the key thing that we have to invest in the whole foundation, not just about pumping the data, but how good is my foundation that the day a user asks a question, how quickly can I respond to that answer, right? So the complete modeling area, the complete processing aspect, the complete ingestion, that need to be scaled, right? Because in the world that we live in, data will continue to increase, right? You will have 100 sources tomorrow that may be of interest, but you should not just go and get those 100 unless you have a need.
Brings up an interesting point in terms of, you know, somebody asking me a question and say, all right, we've got this additional data in my mind, you know, and we've all seen the picture of NASA and how they monitor 20, 30, 50, 100 different monitors at any given time as to what's going on with a particular moonshot or whatever, and getting all of that data and making it meaningful to me as an individual, kind of going back to the title of our webinar here. How important is it? And I think I know the answer, but how important is it that artificial intelligence overlays all of that along with machine learning? So, okay, artificial intelligence brings it all to me in a nice little package, and perhaps in a real-time basis. And then machine learning, again, laying over on top of that, learns how I use it over time and maybe makes adjustments in how that data is presented to me. Is that the logical approach of handling more and more data, as you say?
So I think, and the way you described it, we also have to be clear that AI is not a magic wand, right? And sometimes TV commercials will paint a different picture, but what it allows, from my perspective, is we can go faster, we can go at scale, we can apply more complex methods. But if we don't understand the problem, if we don't understand the data that we're dealing with, we can do all these things, move quickly at scale in the wrong direction. So just because we have an advanced way of doing things doesn't mean that we're going to get, to Rakesh's earlier point, the answer to the question that I'm asking. That's number one. And number two, I first need to be aware of what exists and what I can do so that I can select, that I can make an informed decision. If I don't know that fire exists, I don't even have it as an option for cooking my food. But now that I know what the different technologies, what the different methods, what data I can potentially get access to, then I have to consume that because there's a purpose, because I should, not because I can. And that's the difference between building that data foundation and not the data swamp that Rakesh referred to earlier.
So understand the problem. Don't just adopt some technology because it's new and it's cool. Make sure that it's all focused on solving a problem and delivering information and insights that's meaningful to the end user.
And that I think also goes to one of the key things that we have been seeing, right? And I think that this is a study of 2020, right, where it was quoted that almost 85% of money spent on analytical models and data science and AI, they don't even go to production. So 85% of, and that money runs into billions, if not trillions of dollars that is going on to these kind of solutions, but they're not coming to production, which means someone built it, we tested it, we liked it, we kept it into our dev environment, and it never went to really being used by the end users, right? So one of the key things, no matter how you build these models and what technology you use, the key has to be these models or the insights generated by these models need to be integrated at the final mile where that decision has been made. Unless you take it to that final mile where the decision has been made, and at that point of decision making, you have the intelligence in hands of user, all of this will always be a rear view mirror to look at and feel good about it, but not really make a tangible change to the business, right? So for example, I will just quote one of our largest insurance customers. They're globally one of the largest customers that we work with, right? They wanted to redo the complete financial risk scoring models. And their idea of this whole complex financial risk scoring models was that, you know what, when my users, and which are underwriters, they actually go in and log into filling up the details to put the policy in place, that's when I need the model to trigger and give the risk scores right then and there. So that then the underwriter can look at the risk score, understand, and then accordingly make a decision of how the premium should be, what risk he's taking off, rather than trying to put financial scores to all the policies that have already been issued, right? So that is the key thinking, right? At the time of the transaction, the insights need to be in the hands of the users who are making those decisions.
Understood. Let me switch gears a little bit and kind of address the term silos. So in your past experience with companies that have several divisions or business units, have you often found that their buying happens in silos? And so I've got great information in my division. We may be acquiring the same products or the same components, but there's no consolidation at the corporate level. That to me sounds like a logical approach. Have you seen that, or do company politics too often get in the way of true efficiency?
It's not only company politics, and this is where there's a difference between people running a business or machines running a business. So as a whole, anybody that knows optimization will tell you if we centralize the decision making, it's going to be global optimum. Life is going to be better for the network overall. Otherwise, you're making individual decisions and there's a lot of waste in that process. Now, what happens in real life is that sometimes local decision makers have information that is not captured by the system. So this is one place, for example, where that data that previously only existed in sticky notes and in Joe's mind now can start to get collected. Now we can start to see the correlation between the decisions and the actions, the performance of the business, and take that to a different level. The other thing is, even when you centralize the decision-making process, the data has to come from somewhere. And there's a lot of research on how local decision makers, they're feeding the data, they're feeding their expected demand back to the central location to come up with the decision. And because they know how it works, there's a lot of gaming going on. And I might inflate the expected demand. I might misrepresent the inventories that I have. So in general, tends to be better to centralize these decisions, but we have to be aware about the behavioral effects that it will have in the system, either because there's local information that is not integrated into the decision-making process yet, or because of just behavioral barriers, politics being one of those, that could get in the way of good decisions yielding the results that are expected.
And also, I think one of the key things that I think all the organization, and I think they have, all of them are, data needs to be seen as an asset that they're going to use, right? And what I mean by data is anything that you can acquire from external world needs to be an asset that is not just owned by that department that acquired the data, but also by putting it in a way that it can be centrally used, right? So I think it is definitely getting better than what it used to be, say 3-4 years back, right? Where organizations now truly are very much aware that if you're acquiring a certain data set, it's not just for, hey, this use case that I'm executing, but how do I set it up for a much broader usage within the organization itself, right? But yeah, and I will say that with the title like CDOs coming in, chief data officer coming in, central data teams getting organized in firms, this is getting much better than what it used to be, right, in the past.
So, and speaking of in the past, a lot of companies would rely on just-in-time delivery, which, a supply chain challenge, that maybe that's not the best solution. From a logistical point of view, is there a better solution? One that I've heard of is let's establish some warehouses and let's stock our component parts, and so we become our own distributors rather than relying on a supplier to deliver it just in time. Is that a logical solution? Obviously, there's the real estate impact of having to put a warehousing together or acquire warehousing to store all this, but that, to me, that seems like it would secure a little bit more timeliness from my perspective. I just draw from my warehouse rather than relying on a specific supplier to get there at the last minute.
It would secure that additional buffer, but it goes back to one of the first questions that we were exploring in this session, which is we have to understand the impact of the strategies and the trade-offs associated with that. And there tends to be, in the oil and gas industry, we see that a lot, this big swing between I want to minimize my costs and I want to do as much as I can and just push out services, push out sales. Because when I start to move away from just in time, that comes with a price tag associated with it. If I have 20% more inventory and I do not necessarily use that inventory, then somebody's gonna come, my CFO, and say, hey, you're messing up my WACC, my weighted average cost of capital, or my cash flow requirements are going through the roof. So if we take the opposite approach and we go, hey, just in time is the way to go, and we have to have a single supplier, be very efficient, minimize our back office, well, I'm running a risk that if something goes wrong, my supply chain breaks. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all strategy. I do think that the danger comes when I'm running based on inertia, based on decisions that I don't really understand why they're being made. And therefore, when an event hits or when my inventory starts to build up, I don't really understand why it happened or what do I do next. That's why at the front end, we need to have visibility on those trade-offs. We need to be able to measure the impact and tie that to the decision-making strategy.
Okay, understood. So we're talking a lot about outside suppliers bringing in component parts from a manufacturing point of view and so on. But one key element of the supply chain, of course, is workers. And how do great, we've got all the component parts here, but do we have enough staff to be able to assemble the product to get it out the front door? So from a worker shortage perspective, how will this affect operations? And for example, technology like robots, machine learning, mixed reality, is that going to be a solution or to the worker shortage, or given today's environment? Is that just kind of a futures conversation rather than anything that we can address today?
It's not a futures conversation because the pandemic maybe forced us to say it very explicitly that automation is adding a lot of value in covering for people who don't want to go back to work or don't want to or want to start working remotely. So how can we generate the same throughput without having as many people? And one solution has been automating activities that can be identified as repeatable, that are low risk, that we know what should happen, and they're more deterministic, if you will. So the other place where it's played a massive role, and that I would say it's still developing, but it's developing very rapidly, is how to democratize knowledge. You have in field service, for instance, over 25% of the workforce is retiring in the next 5 years, I think, and I might be underrepresenting that number. How do you build all those 20, 30 years of the install base and how to fix the machines, how to swap components to people that are just getting started? Again, data plays a huge role on from the training to the feedback loops on why are you having to go and revisit an asset? In which situations are you fixing it the first time or not? How do we allocate the technicians to the equipment that they're more likely to be successful on today as we train them in the other systems? It used to be that all these decisions, all these use cases that I'm talking about, it was the field service manager that had to figure this out, talk it out with the technicians. Now we have data to support that, to make it faster, to make that decision at a lower risk, and to make this data, to transform it into an asset for the technicians in this application, so that they have a better chance of performing their tasks right the first time.
Yeah, and there is also one angle to look at it, right? While yes, you want to look at how technology can help you solve for shortage of employees or team members, the other way to look at this whole problem is how can you use data analytics to better engage your employees and your team members so that they're motivated enough not to leave, right? So that angle of how data plays in also is very critical. And it's not just about, see, all this has been so much of, talk that happens more and more, what I call as more office driven jobs, and nobody thinks about employee satisfaction, how we are setting up them from a more operational floor driven, field service driven jobs, right? So, and I think now using data to truly engage your employees at each level becomes the key part, right? And for example, we've been working with one of our leading manufacturers in US, and we were having this conversation with their HR team so that they want to use data now to be able to better plan capacity, better plan overtimes, and better plan the request of who's doing the overtime, right? You don't want the same guy, same team doing overtime every time because he's an expert. So now trying to look at that angle of how you can leverage the data to truly optimize your workforce experience is also very critical, because yes, there is a shortage, and we know that we are in the middle of one of the highest highest resignation periods. So I think using that angle of data is also very critical for the organizations to start to look at to better engage and better retain the employees, rather than just worried about, hey, there's a shortage of labor force, and if someone goes, what do I do?
Yep, I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's a specific use case within that's also very close to my heart, and it's around mental health. So not just retention, but just like black swan events or disruptions in the supply chain, how can we leverage data to predict, to better react, to cover for situations around mental health with our team members? And it's still in its infancy, but you do see some organizations that tend to have more of a social responsibility really attached to them. That it has to do with culture. But when you put together that culture with the analytical knowledge, the technology to be able to take that data, for example, somebody that is all of a sudden missing their work, that they're not attending meetings, that they were a rock star fixing equipment, and now they've been failing, that they're sending out emails at midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. So there's data that is not personal, and because that's also one thing that needs to be considered, but that could provide some leads, some red flags into how to maintain employees' mental health, and by extension, that not only helps with retention, but it helps with the well-being of the employees.
That's an interesting point, and I had not personally thought of supply chain relating directly to employees, but the reality is that once we've shipped the product and it's out there, and we require servicing it based on our contract, then those workers and their ability and skills and training and so on, that's all part of our supply chain component. And as you say, we can get the worker on site, but do they have the background? Do they have the mental positioning and so on? So those are all areas that, at least based on our conversation here, kind of dovetail into a supply chain issue and that sort of thing. So let me ask you a question that from a control point of view. So if I've got suppliers that are also in turn relying on other suppliers, is it a good idea to kind of step around them and reach beyond my first tier guys and try to negotiate volume or deals with their suppliers just to increase my purchasing leverage, or to ensure that I've got my supply chain secured?
Mm-hmm. So here I'll go back to one of my favorite answers, that it depends. But the beauty about it depends is that the fact that there's not a one size fits all means I can benefit from having relevant information to make that decision. And so what are the trade-offs? We go back to that same conversation. When I take on those roles, I have more control, but I'm also adopting the risk that goes with it. I also am increasing my investment. My whole balance sheet changes, and now there's conversations with the CFO on why that makes sense or not. And unless you have the data to see, hey, is this a good idea or not? What am I winning? What am I potentially losing? What are the risks that I get exposed to? What is the probability of those risks happening? And if they materialize, how quickly, how efficiently would I be able to recover from them? So absolutely a conversation worth having. The overall design of the supply chain network, but it happens at that macro level. It happens at the micro level also when you're deciding the product mix and or the customer segments that you're going to be serving. If we think about it, it's really the same conversation applied to different objectives. And the recurring theme that I think pops up is that now we have the possibility, the opportunity of making those decisions with less risk to ourselves, because we can not just get the data, but do something with the data in a fast enough manner so that it makes me feel better about the decisions that I'm making.
So let me take take a sort of a side trip here that as we accumulate data and we determine that, hey, maybe there's going to be a problem with this particular supplier, and so we've got enough data to understand what some additional sources might be. I can't tell you the number of times that I've spoken with companies who've said that we are just so hard to deal with. We just can't get people onboarded quickly enough, and so is that a challenge that you've seen, where this is great, we've got 3 new suppliers, but there is no possible way because of our internal structure that we can get these guys on board within the next 3 months? And so great, we've got a solution, but now we can't do anything about it because of really what amounts to a cumbersome internal process. Have you seen much of that?
Yes, and happens with suppliers, happens a lot with new software or new technologies as well. The models that Rakesh was referring to earlier that get developed and then they never get operationalized. So just because a supplier is good doesn't mean that he's the right fit for my organization. And when we make a decision about what supplier, what individuals am I going to bring into the organization, there needs to be that end-to-end plan of how, what's the level of effort that is needed to integrate these new components to the supply chain, and what is the action plan? Because the days of 3-year SAP integrations are gone from a patient's perspective, right? If something takes more than 90 days, then it's already taking too long, and a lot of things are more on the expectations are in weeks, not even in months. So how do we make strides early on? Is another application of where the data engineering, for example, has to be a critical part of the conversation of, can these different data sets talk to each other? Can these different systems talk to each other? Not just connect them, but reconcile the data. That I won't have duplicates. I won't have different stories being brought up. What is the right timing of how to synchronize these different elements? And even though we have all this technology and the AI, there's still people involved at some part of the process that will need to consume this data, that will need to approve, etc. So how do we train those people? How do we enable them? How do we prevent them from getting overcome by all these different integrations that can become a threat and a nightmare for the incumbent staff?
And also, just from a technology standpoint, right? Standardizing a lot of your integration templates just kind of eliminates the technology barriers for a faster integration, right? Even though they are not the most critical one, but at least you can optimize that to the great extent, and then you're left with more the process and the people aspect of onboarding a new supplier in the ecosystem, right? But now the way technology is evolved, especially with the APIs and the integrations and the data formats, trying to onboard a new supplier is becoming much easier for organizations that have focused on building those standards out for their own internal systems, right? And allowing that to be a externally consumable API that can then be used by any supplier to pass the required data, right? So technology is making it much faster. I think process automation is also there. And then of course, people aspect, we all have to continuously work through, right? There's no quick answer for that.
Yeah, so much of what we talked about today boils down to people. And I'm sensitive to the time. We had promised this to be about 45 minutes. We also promised that we would field some of the calls or some of the questions from the attendees. And I do apologize, we are running out of time, but our intent here will be to provide feedback for all of those questions. We'll make the recording here available to everyone. And for those of you who have asked questions, we'll make sure that we have answers for those and get them out to everyone within the next day or so. But I guess to briefly summarize what we've learned here today, it's about the data, it's about people, it's about the right data that you have, data you need, and both the sources of data and the underlying requirements can be moving targets. Again, what problem are we trying to solve? And that problem that we're trying to solve today might be a little different than what we're trying to solve a month from now. So let's make sure we stay on top of that through machine learning, AI as necessary, but not overly relying on that. But the more that we embrace the technology and understand how it can help us, the better it separates us from the competition that may still be relying on older methods and technologies. And finally, a huge thanks to both Gerardo and Rakesh for your insight and your suggestions today. And while everyone here has your own unique situations and maybe additional questions for them, please feel free to reach out to them directly or just fill in the form that follows at the end of the webinar here. And again, thanks to everyone who joined and for stopping in today. Really appreciate your participation and enjoy the rest of the day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Have a good day.